Hello and welcome to the Citizens Workshop on Saturday, July the 17th, 2021. It's 11 a.m. Arizona time, 11 a.m. Pacific time. And my name is Jay Carpenter. I'm the founder of Desert Blockchain. And this is a new set of events that we're having every Saturday at 11 a.m. Arizona time, which is also 11 a.m. Pacific time. And the idea behind the citizen workshops is to create an opportunity for folks to experiment with decentralization, both in terms of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, the Internet of Things. Today, we're going to be looking at a setup with and I'm going to stop the screen share here. We're going to look at a setup using Raspberry Pis, Node-RED, and connection to the Stellar cryptocurrency. So we invite you to participate. We live stream these, and they're free and open to anybody on via the YouTube live stream. But there also is an opportunity for you to become a Desert Blockchain citizen for $10 a month via Patreon, and you can join in as on the Zoom sessions, ask questions, participate in an interactive fashion. So that's your opportunity set. At Desert Blockchain, we are practicing our decentralization philosophy by not taking sponsors. This is completely community supported, and we are opening up this facility to citizens, which is Desert Blockchain Camp at basically 27th Avenue and Camelback in Phoenix, Arizona. We've got about 26,000 square feet here, and we're going to be having more events where you can learn, you can bring your youth, your sons, your daughters, people that you're mentoring, and introduce them to decentralization. So this is family oriented and it's education oriented. So we encourage you to participate. So I'm going to end the introduction at that and turn it over to Shane Sandler, who's going to conduct the rest of the session and show you some very interesting and exciting opportunities to learn about decentralization, cryptocurrency, Internet of Things, and have some fun playing some games in the process. So go ahead and take it away, Shane.
All right, thank you, Jay. Like you said, my name is Shane Sandler. I go by Blockshangerous on the internet, and we are going to be going through a tutorial on Internet of Things and Raspberry Pi and a little bit of Stellar integration today. So just a little bit of background. I love working with Raspberry Pis for Internet of Things type applications. It's a super inexpensive, easy way to get started, and you can get a whole lot of functionality for pretty cheap. So we can go ahead and start with just setting up your Raspberry Pi. So I've got a new Raspberry Pi here. I like to work with the Raspberry Pi Zeros. They're very inexpensive. The Zero W, the W stands for wireless, so they already have built-in wireless functionality. I think the newer Pis, like the 3 and the 4, also have built-in wireless. Some of the older Pis or the Pi Zero without the W don't have built-in wireless, so you either have to hardwire or get a Wi-Fi dongle for those. So just to be aware when you're looking at hardware. So the Raspberry Pis run entirely on SD cards. So you don't actually have to do anything with the hardware of the Pi to prep. You have to prep your SD card. So, you got to grab an SD reader, and we're going to go ahead and start by preparing our new SD card for our Raspberry Pi. Let me go ahead and plug this in, and then I will share my screen with you all. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to get started with Raspberry Pi, I'm just going to go ahead and share my entire screen because I'm going to be hopping between a few apps here. Okay, so this is OBS that you're looking at here. That's how I'm combining all these video images you're seeing. So anyways, so you're going to want to go ahead and just search Raspberry Pi Imager. It's going to be where you want to get started, and that's going to take you to the Raspberry Pi website and to the software side of things. Go ahead and download the Raspberry Pi Imager. I already did this a little bit earlier, so I've already got it. You know, it's just a standard install. And then this is the imaging tool. It's going to be really useful for choosing and setting up your new SD card. So you choose your SD card, and then you can get started with just the bare bones Raspberry Pi OS, but I prefer to go to other and do the full light and full here. So the full OS install has all of the Node-RED dependencies that you need and everything that you need to get started. And then you just go ahead and write it. And it's obviously going to erase the card and write the card. So depending on the speed of your writer and your card, this can take 5 to 10 minutes. So fortunately, I have another card prepared already for this. So once that gets done, you just pop that card out and put it into your Raspberry Pi. And I'm going to go ahead and end screen sharing here and show you. So I've got a brand new Raspberry Pi, like so fresh. After you get that install done, you will see, and you get it plugged in, you will see a screen that looks like this. Let me go ahead and adjust my webcam for you. So I can't screen share from the Raspberry Pi at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and just run through the quick initial setup on the Raspberry Pi so that you can get it set up for headless and SSH operation. Unfortunately, this isn't exposing correctly, but it shows. I'll just go ahead and put this back up here. Basically, it's just giving you the new Pi setup screen. You just go click through the menus, pretty standard. We are in the United States. Speaking English, our time zone is unique. We're in Phoenix. English, US, next. And then it's going to ask about Wi-Fi and updating. And you definitely want to run it through all the updates. That's super important to make sure that all of your software is going to play nice together. But it can take a while, especially on these Pi Zeros. They're a little slow. It can take like an hour. So if you need to get started right away, you can wait and you can use the sudo commands to do your update later. And so we're going to skip that right now just because for time's sake. And so once you get it connected to Wi-Fi, what you're going to want to do is go over to the Raspberry Pi settings, and you're going to want to enable SSH and VNC. And that is what makes it easier to do headless setup. So basically, most of my Raspberry Pis are hooked up to turrets or all sorts of various IoT devices, and they're not super easy to access and plug a monitor into. So it's much easier to access these remotely. And after the initial setup of just getting it ready for remote access, then you can just connect it through Wi-Fi. So we're going to go up here to preferences. And like I said, you definitely want to get it connected to the internet and updated before you do this if you have time. You go to Raspberry Pi configuration. And that's where you're going to find the two settings that you need. So if you want to so we're going to go over to interfaces, the third tab. And then so SSH is so you can do command line connection, and that's good enough for most things, especially if you're just going to have it running Node-RED automatically on boot up. All you'll probably need is SSH. But for those times when you do need to troubleshoot and actually get a visual representation of the monitor remotely, you want to click VNC enable. So the VNC is what is going to allow you to remotely see the entire desktop as if you had it plugged into a monitor from another machine. And that is super helpful for troubleshooting without having to plug in a monitor. So I would normally just wait for this to get all updated and booted, but I've got another one prepared already so that we don't have to wait on that. So I am going to hop back into my screen share and show you how to do the remote connection once you have your VNC and SSH turned on. So let's see. Get back into my Zoom call and share my screen again. Okay, so when you want to, so now you've got your Raspberry Pi set up for remote access. You can use SSH to get into it by command line, or VNC if you're trying to do some more advanced troubleshooting. I'll show you VNC first, and then I can actually show you the screen share of those settings I just did. So you've got to download VNC Viewer on your other machine. It's got to be on the same network. And I did this earlier as well. So you download VNC and get that installed. And then you just pull up VNC on your other machine. And you can get connected. So I looked earlier. So one of the easiest ways to find the IP address on a Raspberry Pi once you have VNC enabled is simply to click the VNC button in the top right. And once I get my VNC pulled up on the screen, I will show you these things. So I've already got it, found that earlier. It's 192.168.1.90. So that's just doing the check. And then when you set up your initial Pi, it's going to ask you to set up a username and password. So that's what you just saw me doing here. Okay, so now what you can see on my screen share is my remote desktop connection to the Raspberry Pi. And this is just my preferred way to operate on the Raspberry Pi, especially on the Ws, where they're small and or the Raspberry Pi Zeros, I mean, they can be tucked away and never accessed again once you have them connected to Wi-Fi. So what I was saying, now that you can see my screen share, so in order to set up those settings, I'll just show you again real quick. You go to Raspberry Pi configuration, since you weren't able to see that other monitor very good when I was working on it. You go to interfaces, SSH enable, and VNC enable. And those are what allow you to get the remote access. And then once you click on VNC, it shows you your IP address, nice and easy. That's the easiest way to find your IP and get everything connected. Okay. And now once you're in to this, so now your Raspberry Pi is pretty much set up and good to go for whatever purposes you want to use it for. For us, we're using Node-RED. So you can go into programming here. You can fire up Node-RED. And especially when you're booting up your Raspberry Pi for the first time, when you're booting up Node-RED for the first time, things can take a little while. The first boot up on Raspberry Pi has to set up all the operating system files. The first Node-RED boot up on Raspberry Pi has to set up all the files for Node-RED. So it can take a few minutes. Usually once you've gotten through the initial setup phases, Raspberry Pi usually boots up in about a minute, Node-RED another minute after that. So you can, and like as you can see here, there's a command you can use to set it to auto start Node-RED at every boot. That's what I run on my headless Pis so that they just immediately boot up and get connected to Raspberry Pi. So we're still waiting on Node-RED here to get all connected. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is Jay again, and I'd just like to say a couple things to add to what Shane is showing you and why this relates to decentralization. First of all, the Pi Zeros that Shane is operating with are very inexpensive. I think they're less than $10. And you can network these Pi Zeros together so that you're not reliant upon any kind of centralized construct. And that's really at the heart of what we're doing, is keeping things very inexpensive, also keeping things so that they can mesh together, and you can do all sorts of decentralized constructs like running blockchains. You can actually mine on a Raspberry Pi, mine Bitcoin, although you're probably not going to make any money on that. But we really emphasize Raspberry Pis and inexpensive but actually powerful hardware and software that you can create these decentralized mesh networks. So I just wanted to add that, Shane, as
Absolutely.
part of the theme for decentralization. Thank you.
Okay, so I think it probably wasn't booting up that Node-RED because it was already running. Like I said, I always have my Raspberry Pi set to boot up Node-RED automatically when they start. So I just pulled up a command viewer here and entered Node-RED log, and it showed me all the background stuff that's going on. So now that Node-RED is running on this Pi, we know our IP address. We can access it the same way we did last time, and that is by putting in the IP address :1880, and that is how you connect to your Node-RED instance. And you can connect to this from any machine that's on your same local network. So normally when you would boot up Node-RED for the first time, you wouldn't see any of this. This is all, you wouldn't have any flows here. So let me go ahead and open a new flow so you can kind of see more. So you have a blank window like this with your flow going. And so then when you first get started on Node-RED, you can just get started right away. Or you can install some flows or nodes that you need. So one of the most useful ones that most people get started with is Dashboard. I've already installed it on this instance of Node-RED because it's so very useful. This is how you set up your personal UI. And so that when you go to your IP address :1880/UI, that is where you can see anything that you've built in the dashboard. So that's a really useful node to be getting started with. And so let me show you. So we've actually just added a new water cannon into the warehouse to go with our other turret. So I wanted to show you what a really basic flow could look like. So this is basically how the Raspberry Pi that controls these turrets operates the linear actuators. So this node right here, these Raspberry Pi nodes here, they correspond to any of the pins on the Raspberry Pi. You can actually go ahead and grab this one. This one actually doesn't have pins on it, but so there's a 40 pin. There's 40 pins on the Raspberry Pi, and some of them correspond to GPIO pins, which are basically just little low voltage data pins. So once you pull one of these Raspberry Pi nodes in, this is your GPIO pin. And so this pulls up. This is basically just a mock-up of the 40 pins, the layout on the board. And so you choose which pin you're trying to trigger, and then you can set up if it starts out as a 0 or a 1. and what you needed to do. So for these, these two pins correspond to how I have my relay wired up to the Raspberry Pi. So basically what this does is when I click this button, it injects a payload. So every time you see the wiring in node red, it's basically passing the message payload in between the different functional nodes. So this inject just passes the timestamp, whatever time it is, into this next node, which this is a change node. And so that basically just changes the payload to whatever you want. So you can set message.payload to a string or to a number. So in my case, I'm using 0 and 1. So this change node sets the payload to 0. And this one sets it to 1. And then this switch here is basically, this is how I'm basically using this switch as a like a bridge to decide if we're trying to send a left command or a right command. So a 0 or 1. So 0 in this case represents left, and 1 represents right. And so then this switch fires off 2 different commands depending on if it received a 0 or a 1. So this top pin gets triggered if it receives a 0, exactly a 0, and the bottom output is triggered if it receives exactly a 1. So if it receives the left command, the 0, then it fires off both of these 2. You can see how there's actually 3 things wired to this top output. And so what it does functionally is it fires off this message payload 1, and it triggers this pin to be set to 1, and it triggers this pin to be set to 0, because I don't want my relay trying to fire in both directions. These are relays that can allow you to reverse the polarity of the electricity coming out of it so that you can get both directions for powering like an actuator that needs to go in both ways. So it sets the right pin to 0 and the left pin to 1, and it also triggers this delay here so it'll leave that pin set to 1 for 1 second, and then this delay will reset both of those pins, set them both to 0. So this reset turns the payload to 0, sends it to both those pins. So functionally what this flow does is when I click left, it injects the 1 and into the left pin, and when I hit the right, it injects the 1 into the right pin. You see how it's triggering those? It's triggering the 1s for 1 second, and then it resets it. So that's how the functionality for that really basic flow works. And this is how the up and down works as well. And then the firing is basically just a simplified version, because for the firing mechanism, we don't need to go in both directions. It just has to trigger in one direction. So this is an even simpler flow here. You just inject the timestamp, you set the pin to 1, and then you reset it after the delay that you want. So that's basically telling the pin to fire. It's sending the signal to the relay, and that is what's triggering it. And so, yeah, like Jay said, this is all really inexpensive. You can get these Raspberry Pis for 10 or 20 bucks if you want like a full kit. And then I got 5 of these relays for like 10 bucks. And the relays can trigger anything from just a small 5-volt DC power supply all the way up to 10 amps of 120 volt alternating current. So just using a very inexpensive relay on top of these little 5-volt pins can give you a lot of powerful functionality for not a lot of money. Okay.
Could I say something about
Absolutely. Feel free to jump in whenever.
So it's critical to keep in mind that the software that Shane is showing you right now, Node Red, is very mature. It started in around 2010, I think it was. It started with IBM. It is open source. It's free. There's a very large community that uses Node Red to control different devices, do many different things. This is very powerful software. And large companies like Hitachi use Node-RED as an integral part of some of their industrial operations and so forth. But suffice it to say that if you take the time to learn Node-RED, it will, in my view, it will be well worth your time. And Node-RED is something that's going to be around for a long time, and it's a great way to get into the Internet of Things, decentralization, Raspberry Pis, all sorts of powerful applications. And there's a large library, as Shane is showing you right now, of pre-written applications and flows. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got a great community, and a lot of people who develop on it are really into open source. So you can find a lot of things that other people have built. Like Jay was saying, the library here is really powerful. So once we come to like cryptocurrency, you can search the library and you can find flows that people have built. You can find nodes that people have built. You can find full collections. And so these are all just packages and tools that help you to build something faster. So for example, I think I've tried this Binance Node here. This is really useful if you want to connect to the Binance API. Somebody's already written out all of the API connections, then you can just import them and just drag them and drop them and connect it up however you want. So, if you want to trigger a Binance buy based on, anything that you want in your Node-RED flow, you can do that. And then, for example, my flow here is the one that connects to Stellar Lumens. And so my SDK is just a flow versus all these red ones are nodes. And the nodes are really cool. They take a bit more work to build out a package. I haven't figured that part out yet. I want to ultimately port my Stellar SDK over to a node package like this, but these basically add all these different nodes. So just the same way you find the default nodes over here that you can drag and drop, when you import a new node package, it has more nodes like this. So for example, this is my Telegram package that allows me to receive all the text commands in the Telegram app. And then this is that dashboard package that we downloaded that allows you to make all these nice little UI forms. And so you can find all sorts of different packages, from Binance to Ethereum to Stellar, to controlling like smart home devices like Wi-Fi sockets and things of that nature. People have built out all the packages, and it just makes it a really fast sort of prototyping and development environment. So that is sort of the basic intro to Node-RED here. I was going to give a little bit more walkthrough on my Stellar SDK. So let's go ahead and do that.
If I could make a comment, Shane.
Of course.
It is possible to connect your Node-RED workflows and instances and so forth to websites as well. So you can actually integrate this into HTTP and have a website that faces out to the public. You do have to be cautious of security issues, but it is possible to interface this with websites, so you get a very dynamic, very ubiquitous set of tools that that you can use. Just wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're definitely going to be exploring some of these integrations with front ends and websites as we continue these workshops and continue to develop on Node-RED ourselves. So we will have more tips and tricks along those lines as these workshops continue. I know that if you're not using any particular like custom packages, there's a service called Fred, which is front end for Node-RED, which basically allows you to sort of expose your dashboard in, I think it's limited like 1 request per second or something like that. So it's not for any sort of high speed action or for custom nodes. And like, it doesn't really work for my Stellar flow because I have to mess with the settings file. And so we can actually start talking about that right now. So we were talking about using the manage palette here for installing modules and functional nodes. But when you're just importing a flow, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it command line through using npm, or you can just copy and paste it. You can also download the JSON file and import it that way. So when you're importing a flow, you've got a few options. You come over here to the hamburger, you do import. I like to do it in a new flow. So yeah, if you have the JSON file, you go right there to the select file to import. Otherwise, you can just copy and paste. And when you import that, it pulls in your flow. And so this is everything that was shown in that flow that we just imported. So one thing that you might see differently on yours is that if you don't have everything installed, all of the required modules, you'll see some of these nodes that don't work. For example, if you didn't have the Telegram node installed, these would be dotted lines and they wouldn't work and you wouldn't be able to deploy. So that can be a tricky environment to be in because, you know, if you accidentally import a flow that needs a node that you need and you can't figure out which one it is, you can't deploy any of your other flows, which can get very annoying. So in that case, you can go to this gear icon right here and scroll down, you'll see unknown. And if you delete off those unknown items, you can get back to a state where you can deploy. Unfortunately, there is not yet, at least that I'm aware of, a way to determine what modules you're missing when you accidentally import a flow that has dependencies that you don't have. So as far as importing this Stellar SDK goes, it doesn't have any required modules other than the dashboard. The dashboard is what you need to get these buttons and the text fields. The one thing you will notice when you import the Stellar flow is that it won't work natively unless you change your settings files. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that now, as well as a little SSH tutorial. So go ahead and pull up Putty. You can use, you know, whatever app you want for doing SSH. I prefer Putty 1.90. And so this is just how we're going to command line into, oh, things are in the way. This is how we're just going to command line into the Raspberry Pi. What's that? Oh, okay. So now we're SSH into our Raspberry Pi, so we can go ahead and stop Node-RED so that we can change the settings files. So that just stopped Node-RED, and since we already have, and we could have easily done this in VNC as well, but I just wanted to show you the little SSH tutorial. And we can do what I'm about to do via the command line as well. I prefer to just do it visually. So once you've, so when you first go into your folder structure, you might not be able to see your .node-RED folder, and that could be because you don't have show hidden on. You do have to have show hidden turned on if you're navigating through the visual folder structure. And if you haven't already booted up Node-RED at least once, you might not have the folder either, and you probably definitely won't have the settings file that you need. So you have to have run Node-RED at least once, and then you come into your folder here, and you go to settings. While that's pulling up, I'm going to go ahead and also pull up the little code snippet on my website. So when you're trying to work with the Stellar SDK, you have to add 2 dependencies into the settings file. So if you come here to my Getting Started with Stellar Red post, you'll see these are the 2 little code snippets that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and copy those, and I put a little screenshot here for where it actually goes. Let me go ahead and full screen this VNC. So this is our settings file that we just opened up. And I'm already at the right spot, but it starts at the top, obviously, when you first open it. And then you just want to scroll down about 2/3 of the way down. You'll see global settings, context, I believe. There it is, global function, global settings context. Obviously, you won't have this in here yet. This is what we have to add. So when you're first scrolling through, it's going to look like that. And you just want to go ahead and add in that code right there. And you do have to be careful if you're copying and pasting the code over that you don't get the italicized quotes. The first time I did this, it brought in the italicized quotes, like sort of how there's a front quote and a back quote. And the JS file did not like that. It was throwing out errors when I went to boot up Node-RED. So make sure you just have the regular quotes in there. And if you're using, if you're on a Raspberry Pi, whatever text editor boots up should have the color coding. And when you see it turn orange like this, you'll know that it worked correctly. And you go ahead and save that. And you can shut that settings file down. And now you can fire Node-RED up again. We can go to Node-RED. We can do it through VNC or just through the SSH here. So yeah, you can start it via command line with Node-RED start, or if you're doing VNC or just you have it up on a monitor, you can just go to programming and click Node-RED. Either way works just fine. And you'll see here, and once again, it gives you this command right here. You can, if you want to set up your Node-RED to automatic, or your Raspberry Pi to automatically start up Node-RED every time it boots, you just copy and paste that line right there into a new command prompt window. So yeah, this takes about a minute to usually boot back up. You can see that it's disconnected since we turned off Node-RED. And it tries about every minute to connect, or you can just do a force refresh once you see that it's running. So depending on what Raspberry Pi you have, it may be a little faster than this. These Pi Zeros are great little workhorses. They can do a lot, but they don't have a ton of processing power. So they can be a little slow when you're doing more intensive things. I know the newer Raspberry Pi 4s have a lot more power to them, and they can really get going when they're doing stuff. So those will be a little faster than this. And looks like we're getting flows started. So we can go ahead. It looks like it's about to try now on its own. Let's see if it connects. Not quite ready yet. So it's still going. Once it's done, it'll put out a little text blurb about how to find the flows. While we're waiting on that, I can go ahead and show you. So this is the other Raspberry Pi that we've got running in here. This is the one that's actually running the turret, the launcher. So when you can see, if I pull up the debug on this, you can see when I enter a command, actually, it looks like I removed a lot of the debugging feedback on this because it was all working. So that's not really giving us much, but you can see on this as well, just like the other flow that I was showing you that had the pins. So this flow is basically the same, just a little bit more complex. Instead of an inject button, it's waiting for that telegram command. And this one has a parser in it because this one can actually get some numerical data if you want to go left for 5, for example. And then it's basically the same logical flow, though. It just sends the pin 1 or 0. So like when I enter a left command, you can see there that it says left to 0. And And for example, if I use the parser, I can do /left5. And then you can see here that the delay is set to 5 seconds and it's staying on 1 for much longer. And there's right. So you can see a little bit about the back end of how this flow is working. This other one should definitely be booted up by now. So yeah, you can see it says that it started flows and now we're connected again. And so now that you've got that code in your settings.js, all of your Stellar SDK should be working now. All this stuff that we've imported. So this is where most of this UI is based in. So you can, an easy way to check to see if you're properly connected to the Stellar Horizon is the API for the Stellar network, is you can just come here to generate a testnet key pair or really any key pair. And yeah, if it says success and shows you your public and secret key, then you're properly connected to the Stellar Horizon SDK. And so that is your general basic for how to get Node-RED set up with on a Raspberry Pi and with Stellar. So like I've said a couple times, the Stellar SDK isn't a package of nodes yet. So it's just a flow and you can copy and paste whatever bits of the flow you need for your own purposes. So this is a useful example right here. So this little node right here that's labeled monitor account is basically monitoring an account, a Stellar account, and waiting for a transaction. So you can use in the UI here, this field is right here, the public key to monitor. So you put in a Stellar public key. So for example, we can take the one we just generated. Put that in, and it's going to monitor that account and wait for a payment. So what this flow does is it waits to, basically this node right here is just waiting for any sort of payment to come into that account. And then this switch right here is looking at what the actual asset is, because on the Stellar network, you can have multiple assets. Anyone can make any asset named anything that they want. So you gotta be careful that you're getting the asset from the issuer that you actually want. Basically, this switch is just checking to see if it's turret token, which is my personal token, or if it's the native token lumens. And then that triggers whatever else you want it to do. So in the case of this switch, the top output is turret and lumens. So if this account that it's monitoring receives turret token, it's going to both send it to this debug node and it's going to send it to this function, which this function basically just sends a little thank you for and the amount of turret received. And it just pops up that notification. Versus on the other hand, if it's lumens, which it fires off this bottom here, it sends it to the debug node. It also pops up a little notification that it's returning those lumens. It's going to send them back. And then here is the actual transaction submission for submitting a transaction to the Stellar network. So if you needed to modify some of the things about what you wanted to trigger after receiving any sort of payment, that would be where we would do it, would be in this node. And that is basically how you get started with the Stellar SDK here. Hopefully we'll start getting some feedback on these videos soon, and you can let us know what other topics you're interested in and what you'd like us to go over. And if you have any specific questions or use cases or things you want to learn, please let us know, and we can make sure to incorporate those in some of our future sessions. I think that's about all I had prepared. If there's anything else we want to talk about today.
Yeah, Shane, if you could simply go to your target range view and show how you can control the turret. I know you're having some problems firing the launcher, but just show how you can move it. Yeah. And then maybe talk about how it can be incorporated or controlled via the
absolutely.
app.
So let's zoom out a little bit on this turret flow. So it looks a little bit complicated when you see everything like that, and that is partly my fault for not segmenting this better. You definitely can get more organized on these flows, but you can see the gist of sort of how it works visually and like programmatically. Sorry, I'm just trying to move this Zoom window. It's blocking me. So basically all of the so you've got all of your Telegram, responses here. It's all waiting. It's waiting for all the Telegram commands. And then it goes through the functional backend of what it's doing. And then typically the final result is triggering a pin. And these pins trigger various relays that are on the launcher that are connected to either the solenoid to trigger the firing mechanism or the linear actuators to make things move. And then all of where you're seeing all of this stuff dumped down to is this is the Telegram response. So this is how the bot talks back to the Telegram chat. So I can go ahead and pull the Telegram up here. And so we pull up this right here. This just gives us a little bit quicker access. So for example, here's our up down pins. If we do /up, you can see very briefly that it changes that pin to a 1. I don't think that on the back end, there's any visual notification for when it receives, like the Telegram nodes don't show that it's receiving the command. It does give you the feedback that it's connected to the bot. So there's a few things going on in the back end here. So Telegram makes it very easy to set up bots within the Telegram environment. And so I built this Cannoneer bot just using the Telegram bot interface. And then that Cannoneer bot is connected to these Telegram nodes. So when you go to set up your actual bot, you have to enter your private authentication key so that the bot knows it's, the node red is verified to talk to it and control it. And so that's how it's communicating between Telegram and node red, is through these Telegram nodes, which they were just built by someone else. I just went into manage palette, install Telegram. Oh, there's a G in that word. And it's right here, the node red contrib Telegram bot. And that gives you these functional nodes. And then when you click this button right here, you can get a lot more info about the node package. So you can see what all nodes that it includes. And depending on how good the creator's documentation is, you can get all sorts of information about how to actually use it. This node package has excellent documentation and it has so much functionality, just an absolute ton of things that were built into this Telegram bot node to give you tons of functionality.
Shane, can you minimize the node red view and maximize the target range and the
Maximize which part?
maximize the view of the target?
Oh yeah, well I can just stop screen sharing. And that will get us back to our stream, and you can see
cool.
Everything that we've got going on here.
And then show how you can move the launcher with the Telegram.
So yeah, you can do left and right and up and down. Like Jay said, I've got a problem with my power supply from my solenoid firing mechanism today. I think I lost my ground connection, so I just have to do a little rewiring on that to get that back going again. And then arm is just a variable that exists in the node red flow, just to give me a little bit of a safety mechanism in case I don't want it firing or I want a little bit of a cooldown between shots. So it'll still act like it's firing. It's just not actually triggering the relay. The relay has a bad power supply at the moment.
Yeah, you can watch last week's session and actually see the launcher firing and hitting some targets and that sort of thing. So, and we'll go over this next week as well.
Yeah.
and emphasize, how the launcher works, and might even be able to fire up the water cannon, and show how the water cannon can work using the same platform. But that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I'll definitely be in the warehouse doing some live streams and some testing on the water cannon this week. We'll have some content about that this week for sure. And so these
Cool.
Telegram commands can be easily activated using those button commands, and that is right through here. This through a functionality called keyboard, which is a part of that Telegram node module pack. And they can also just be typed with slash. You can do, slash left. And once you enter slash as well, you can also click on these. So quite a few options for as far as actually getting these commands out there. And then the thing I was mentioning too with the left right is that parser. So you can do left, 0.5 if you're trying to get really precise while you're trying to aim. Oh, I didn't type well. Let me try that again. So yeah, that's just a really, really short move, or, if you need to move further, you can. And so all of these numbers are just representing seconds. These are just seconds that the relay is active and that the actuator's moving. The actuators have a set rate of speed, and they're just running for as long as you tell them to.
Hang on, I'm gonna show you something. This is not a like a video game that we're showing you. Hang on.
This is real.
This is real. And if the launcher was actually working right now, I would be in jeopardy.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is, it feels like a video game, but it is a live stream. And we've got a decent latency when we're running it through Zoom like this. As you can see on the Zoom call, and you'll be able to see in the Zoom recording, the difference between me clicking it and the video feed actually getting out to the Zoom call is less than a half second. If you are paying attention to the YouTube live stream or anything like that, you can see that there is a significant delay. So that doesn't really work for a live game type of environment. So we are still experimenting with different ways to deliver the stream and the controls to create a better user experience.
And the goal of what we're working on is to continue to develop this and create a more seamless interface. And this is it might be obvious to you, but this launcher, the turret, the water cannon, all this can be controlled from anywhere in the world as long as you've got a connection to the internet. You can get on Telegram. And part of our opportunity set to learn and to teach is to refine this interface, make it more seamless, a lot of fun, and open up the opportunity for parents and youth to come in and create your own target range, your own setup with Node-RED, Raspberry Pis, launchers, all sorts of devices, and to tie it into cryptocurrency if you choose to do that. And that can be on test nets, so you're not actually using live cryptocurrency. You're not at risk of somebody hacking your account and basically, that sort of thing. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities ahead, and we're going to have these sessions every Saturday for the foreseeable future, so that between 11 a.m. and 12 noon Arizona and Pacific time. So we really encourage you to stay tuned for some great things to come. And if you're a citizen and you'd like to bring your youth here to the Desert Blockchain Camp and actually work on this stuff hands-on, you can do that. So we do have Steve that's joined us. Steve, I'd like to kind of open it up before we end. Do you have any questions, any comments for Shane or me? And yeah, go ahead, Steve.
No, Jay, very interesting. One of those things that, I'm not a programmer, but definitely want to find out more about how the decentralization and the, blockchain works. And I think it's very interesting how you guys are making it. I like the idea that the kids are going to get involved and we're helping youth to learn. I think the great idea behind it all. And so, of course, I'm a member of the Patreon. Your group has been a member for a while, so but always very interesting, fascinating, and very educational.
Well, Steve, it's great that you bring up the part that you're not a programmer. And Shane, if you would talk about the amount of time that you've been experimenting with Node-RED, because you're fairly new to this as well, and you've created some really powerful flows and so forth. So
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't hear what you were saying, Steve. Jay's got his headphones in, and I don't have a speaker right now to get the feedback from the Zoom call. But yeah, like he's saying, I'm not a coder. I don't consider myself a coder by any means. I took a class in Java in college 10 years ago. So yeah, with Node-RED, I feel like I can be a programmer. I can build some basic functionality and this type of stuff. Yeah, I don't know how to do C. I'm just now getting into GitHub and I'm learning what push and pull requests are and trying to keep versioning. I know I'm doing a really bad job of versioning on like some of these flows and things that I built. So yeah, I'm definitely a beginner, and I think it's just such a powerful tool, and there's just so many tutorials available. Like the resources are there. I think too, what's a fun thing is that since the tools are so much more robust, the people that do know how to use them are much more accessible than like traditional programmers. Like I had some trouble getting my initial connection to Stellar going in Node-RED, and I paid somebody on Fiverr $100 to do the basic setup and connection for me, and then I was able to build everything else out I wanted on top of that basic connection. And so some of these low code and no code platforms not only are like, I know that as a project creator, like if I hire someone else out to build Node-RED for me, I can actually like review it and read it. And that's really nice, because if somebody, handed me some Angular or JS or something, I would just not really be able to review it and just hope that they aren't, putting malicious stuff in there. Versus Node-RED, I can look at it and see it and actually understand what's going on. And so then not only can I review it if someone else was building it, but I can build on it and expand on it and, modify what other people have created. And but yeah, even if you're just hiring someone else to build it, it's way cheaper to have someone build it using, a high speed, easy tool than to have to build it all out from scratch. So I love Fiverr for projects like this, for getting like little one-off jobs and things, just getting quick access to somebody who is an expert, and can help me out. And the Node-RED forum's pretty good too.
You can also create some really powerful entertainment systems using the Raspberry Pis and Node-RED and some other packages. Home Assistant is a very powerful package where you can control your lights, your air conditioning, all kinds of things. So we're showing you some things that you can do here with like a gaming environment using cryptocurrency. But believe me, there are many other applications using these small board computers called Raspberry Pis and something like Node-RED or Home Assistant and so forth. So that's pretty much the end of our time. Thank you for watching this. Thank everybody for tuning in. We did have some folks on the live stream. We will be having these for the foreseeable future on every Saturday from 11 to noon. We'll probably be expanding this to weeknights as well, but stay tuned, and we would appreciate your feedback if this is helpful, and we just plan to continue to improve it. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording. Anything you want to conclude with, Shane?
No, I think that's it. Thank you for joining us. And if you're watching this recording, we appreciate it. And let us know what else you want to see. Please leave us some comments wherever you're watching this to ask for future content and help guide us in creating stuff that people actually want to consume.
Cool. All right. So recording has stopped and we're going to